And welcome into another edition of Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle of 1053 The Fan. We had a great interview with Joe O'Donnell, the voice of the Minnesota Wild, as we make our way through the Central Division with previews leading you into training camp. And the great thing about Joe is very familiar with his time with the Houston Aeros and Minnesota Wild. Lots of years with Matt Dumba. Gave us some amazing insight on the new Stars defenseman. So if you haven't listened to that yet, please check it out. We go over the border today, and we talk to one of my favorites, and you want to talk about an upcoming star. This kid has it all, and I'm going to give him the biggest compliment I can in that someday, if those of you that don't know, I'm a program director, brand manager. I pick talent for a living, and I see this next guest being a guy that's either on Sportsnet or CBC up in Canada. He's an absolute stud. Let's introduce our next guest. A lot of you, the last time he was on, said, wow, what a great guest Connor was. Connor Hrabchak, credentialed writer covering the Winnipeg Jets for The Hockey Writer, content creator, and contributor to @Sports Talk Winnipeg, which you can find on YouTube, and co-host of his podcast at Level Flight Winnipeg. The only thing is he put on his Twitter handle, folks, that Twitter handle is at Connor Hrabchak. That's with an H1. So make sure you follow him. Hashtag FTTB. So I'm pumping his tires, and then I see a San Francisco 49ers logo. Connor.
First, I want to say thank you. That's very, very kind introduction. But yes, I am a 49ers fan, and it might be weird to think, like, I live in Winnipeg. How could I like a team from San Francisco? But it's literally the dumbest story ever. As a 9 or 10-year-old kid, I just liked their jerseys. And here we are 10 years later. I've liked them every single year. I've got a ton of merch. Every time they come to Minneapolis, I go down. It's about an 8-hour drive, go watch the game. And they're there this year too, week 2, 49ers at Vikings. So I'm excited to go down there again this year and watch them hopefully get a win in Minneapolis.
Well, I can appreciate that you like those colors. I would say silver and blue would look good on you as well.
No way. No way.
And that's going to do it for today's Spits and Suds. Just kidding.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, I understand that. Are you a Blue Bombers fan?
I am a big Blue Bombers fan.
Okay.
My family's been season ticket holders for a long time, and we go to every single game. And they've got a big home and home coming up these next 2 weekends too. So CFL football I love as well, but NFL can't really compete with that.
I don't know if you remember this, but when I was doing regular appearances on TSN Winnipeg, and one of the things in the story that fascinated me the most was the Winnipeg Blue Bombers fan that I don't believe changed his underwear, or he did something that no matter what the temperature, until the Blue Bombers won the championship. And they ended up doing that, but found that fascinating.
It was I believe the story was he wore shorts.
Shorts, that's it.
Until they won. And in Winnipeg, I mean, we have kind of a reputation here for having some cold winters. So you know how crazy that would be. But I remember that because I remember seeing the video of him putting on pants, like, when they were up 20 in the Grey Cup in the fourth quarter. It was like this big thing. And it was like, oh my goodness, this guy's finally putting on pants. But yeah, wearing shorts for that long, because there was a long drought. It was like 30 plus years that they didn't win in a 9-team league. That's a long time. So it was quite the story there. Yeah.
Let's start with an overview. Since you live and cover the Jets, and I hate to use this term because you're in the biggest league, but do Jets fans and the people that cover the team, are they considered a smaller market team?
I think so, for sure. Like, I often refer to the Jets as the smallest market in the NHL, just because there's less than 1 million people that live in Winnipeg. So I believe that I believe I searched it up, and that's actually the smallest population of a major city that has a hockey team in the NHL. Arizona, I mean, like, they played in 1 million places, so that might have changed when they were moving all over the place there, and now obviously they're in Utah. But I would think they're the smallest market. They often get kind of dunked on as, a place that nobody wants to play, even though they brought back Hellebuyck and Scheifele for 8 years and have done a pretty good job retaining talent. which didn't really age well with the recent Rutger McGroarty news. But I think that if you asked a lot of the people that I work with, the reporters up here in Winnipeg, they would say the same thing, that they're one of the smallest markets, if not the smallest market in the NHL.
That said, the Canada Life Center, that's a pretty cool barn to watch
Yeah.
NHL hockey. It's just, I feel like the fans are on top. They're into the game. It's a smaller barn. Was it like 10, 11,000? How big is it?
It's
Is it?
15,300,
Oh, okay.
15,300.
Wow. Didn't
And
seem that big.
yeah, when the playoffs come around and the whiteout, oh my goodness, that first game against the Avs in the playoffs this year where the Jets won 7-6.
Yeah.
I've never been at a more roller coaster game. The fans, it was like a afternoon game too. I believe it was like a Saturday afternoon
Yeah.
or Sunday afternoon. So it was, the fans were ready to go, people were partying. And that, like you said, if there's one positive about having a small arena like that, it's that the fans are literally on top of you. And when there's 15,000 people all wearing white, yelling, and they're right on top of you, and your starting goalie gives up 7 goals, and they're doing all these chants like that, that's one of the craziest atmospheres I've ever seen in my life.
So just recently, and you dropped his name, Michigan star Rutger McGroarty's rights were traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And just, it seemed like it was out of the blue. I was watching your podcast and you guys kind of broke the news and just said, he wants to be traded based. All of a sudden, it just kind of came out of nowhere. And now he's a Pittsburgh Penguin. You guys get Braden Yeager in return. What are you hearing about Yeager and this whole situation, and how is the fan base taking it?
Yeah, so I'll start with the fan base thing because that's actually really interesting. The fan base turned on Rutger pretty quickly.
Quick, yeah, I
And
bet.
yeah. And you know what? I honestly understand it a little bit. Like I said earlier, with them being the smallest market in the league, the smallest fan base, but maybe the most passionate. It's tough to hear that on a player that hasn't even really been here yet, just wants out. And then Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke to the media, and this was the whole puzzling part of this, is he said that he didn't actually get a real reason from Rutger McGroarty and his camp. Rutger and his camp just said it didn't feel right. And that was the only explanation that Cheveldayoff received. That's why he wouldn't sign. And then they had to look elsewhere, and they got Braden Yeager. And truth be told, when they made the trade for him, I knew that he was playing with Moose Jaw in the WHL, but I didn't know much outside of that. So I have spent the last couple of days doing a lot of research. And I honestly think, given the circumstance of this deal, the public trade request, the fact that every team knew that they could just wait out the Jets because they had to trade this guy because he wouldn't sign there, getting the same pick, Rutger McGroarty was 14th overall in 2022, Yeager being 14th overall in 2023, getting the same pick just a year later, a prospect that's from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, a Western Canadian, that went well. That went over well with
Yeah.
the fans. I can tell you that for sure. And getting a player who Hustler interviewed on Winnipeg Sports Talk wants to be a Winnipeg Jet, wants to be here. He signed his entry level contract. He's ready to come to training camp and maybe win a spot. I think that helped kind of fuel the fire of the turn on Rutger McGroarty as well. Like getting a player back who's a Western Canadian prairie boy who, wants to be a Winnipeg Jet just makes it feel like, why wouldn't Rutger want to be here? But I think the Jets did pretty well with this deal, and it went over with the fan base well once they saw the return. But yeah, they turned on Rutger pretty quick, and I honestly can't even blame them.
From an outside perspective, I'm a big Kevin Cheveldayoff fan. I think he makes really good deadline deal moves. I think Winnipeg's always in the hunt. And I'm always interested. Like when I was talking with Joe O'Donnell yesterday, we both agreed. And then there's Winnipeg. Who knows what's going to happen with Winnipeg? Because prior to last year, I had Winnipeg out, and then they find themselves in the top 3, which is impressive. So on the inside, what do fans and what do the media think of the job that Cheveldayoff has done? Because he's been there a while.
Yeah, he has. He's been there ever since the Jets came back. I believe he's one of the longest tenured general managers in the league. He's definitely in the top 3. I don't know if he's number 2 anymore. But you'll get mixed answers when you ask that question. He's made himself a reputation of always finding his way out of deals when he's backed into a corner. So we just talked about the Rutger he's not going to sign there. You're backed into a corner. You have to trade him. And they did okay. They got out unscathed. They got Braden Yeager, another prospect, just 1 year younger, first round pick. They did okay in that deal. The Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, which is arguably his best in his long tenure here as a Jet. Dubois wanted out, wasn't going to re-sign here, backed into a corner with a 22-year-old, 23-year-old center who you thought could be a top six center for the next decade for your team. And all of a sudden you have to trade him. Well, he went and got Gabriel Velarde, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, and a second round pick, which ended up being the Jets' top pick in the draft this past season. Alphonse Frey, a smooth skating defenseman, really excited to watch him. But he's built this reputation over the last 12, 13 years, 14 years, whatever the number is, of finding his way out of deals when players don't want to be here because, like I said, small market. There are players that don't want to be here at times, and he has to make those moves. Andrew Kopp was another one. It's honestly impressive that he's able to keep getting away with that. But people do have their issues. And, last year, I think he silenced a lot of those when he made the big splashes at the trade deadline. I think the biggest knock on him was when the Jets have a good team, when they're in a playoff spot, he refuses to kind of go for it, which didn't really make sense. Like that, they did that in 2018 when they went to the Western Conference Finals. They traded their first round pick. They've done it other times. Last year, they traded it for Sean Monahan, and they made a big splash on deadline day for Tyler Toffoli.
Yep.
So he's shown that he can be aggressive in those moments, but that's really it's tough because he's been here so long, and the best run that the Jets have had was that 2017-18 run to the Western Conference Finals. They got knocked out by Vegas. Last year was the best regular season that they've had, where they had 110 points, but then looked completely out of place in the playoffs, dropping all 4 games after winning the first to the Avalanche. So I don't know. You'll get really mixed answers, both from a fan and media perspective. But personally, I think he's done an okay job, especially these past couple of years with these deals where he's backed into a corner and the Jets have come out unscathed. They haven't outright lost the deals. And in the Pierre-Luc Dubois one, I mean, they just absolutely fleeced the Kings in that one. So you gotta tip your cap there. But yeah, the Jets, if they're able to put together another good season, they had a lot of free agents leave because of their cap space kind of conundrum here. Like they were aggressive last year, so therefore a lot of players are gonna leave when they're UFAs. It'll be interesting to see how they do, but I think Kevin Cheveldayoff, especially in these last 3-4 years with the deals, has put the Jets in a spot to compete year after year, especially with retaining Hellebuyck and Scheifele on top of that.
Manitoba is known for its toughness, and I use Philadelphia as an example. You've had a history of physicality with the Flyers team. Fan base loves it. They eat it up. And is that the same in Winnipeg? Because one of the identities of this Jets team over the years, no matter who the coach is just a physical, strong style play where if you're playing the Jets, it's going to be, a tough game. Obviously, Connor Hellebuyck in net, we know that. But physicality, is that the theme that the fan base loves? And does Cheveldayoff have to play to that? Obviously, winning first, but is that style there to stay?
I do think that a large portion of the fan base does kind of prefer that hard-nosed style that gets the crowd going. I mean, in a playoff game, when Adam Lowry lays a massive hit on Cale Makar or one of the Avalanche players, like that gets the crowd going. And I think I wouldn't say it's their identity. That third line of Niederreiter, Lowry, and Appleton, that is that line's identity, is to play strong defense, cycle the puck down low, be physical when the opportunity presents itself. As for the top six, I don't think there's enough, maybe sandpaper, grit, if that's the words you want to use, in that top six. So maybe that's where he has to focus. But honestly, when I hear those terms and I hear, playing to an identity and playing physical, I always think of the blue line. And with Brendan Dillon leaving in free agency to the New Jersey Devils, that leaves a massive hole on the Jets blue line, both just from an on-ice perspective in terms of, he's a great defensive defenseman. He does a great job clearing the net, but also to the physicality and the leadership that you spoke to there. Dylan Sandberg was on the third pair last year. He's likely going to move up and take that second pairing role. But the Jets blue line is pretty small and not physical. So I think that's another thing I didn't bring up with Cheveldayoff, and a thing that fans have issue with is how maybe weak the blue line has been in years past. Last year they won the Jennings Trophy for the lowest goals against, but Connor Hellebuyck also won the Vezina.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of give and take there. How much was it Hellebuyck? How much was it the blue line, the system? What was it really? But in the playoffs, they definitely got out physicaled down low, especially their blue line by the Colorado Avalanche, who you wouldn't think is a physical team.
Right.
Nathan McKinnon,
Deceptive.
Mikko Rantanen, but their bottom six is in there, and
Yeah.
they can do that, and they can play that way.
Yeah.
And Josh Morrissey is an absolute star, so you don't want him to go around throwing hits and playing all physical. But the rest of that blue line does leave a lot to be desired in terms of clean zone exits, beating a forecheck that is more physical than them. And that's something that is a big question mark going into the season with the loss of Brendan Dillon, who is a 6'4", 220-pound physical defensive defenseman, and off to New Jersey.
And it's interesting because you mentioned the Colorado Avalanche, and one thing that was missing from the Avs this year, Kadri kept coming up, was we need that center, just like Kadri was, that can give us some scoring but also some physicality. And the identity of the Jets, would you say that the player that it kind of evolves around is still Mark Scheifele?
Definitely offensively, I think he's going to be the top line center again this year. It's interesting because he's played with Kyle Connor a lot in the past 3-4 years, but their results haven't really been that great together. They sort of break even on goals for and goals against. And when you want your top line, you don't want to break even with your top line, right? So that's a big talking point here in Winnipeg is actually, should Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele play together, given the results these past couple years? And it'll be interesting to see what new head coach Scott Arniel does on the first day of training camp, whether or not those two players are going to be together, given the results that they've had both in the playoffs and the regular season over the past couple years. But everything offensively definitely still runs around Mark Scheifele. Who is he going to play with? Can that top line deliver positive results and a positive goal share and not just be a break-even line? Because that kind of killed them down the stretch last year in the playoffs against the Colorado Avalanche when, they had an icing. Maybe they were out there a little too long. Nathan McKinnon hops over the boards and you're toast at that point. So it'll be interesting to see what Arniel does on that sense. But Mark Scheifele is definitely still the key player offensively here in Winnipeg.
So Bones steps down, and we all knew Bones' style. You just mentioned Arniel, the new head coach, started his career with Winnipeg as a player, was the associate head coach under Bones, now gets elevated to the position. Kind of the odds-on favorite as soon as Bones stepped down. It is going to be interesting because he was a coach in the Bones system, yet I could see him making some tweaks.
Yes, and he had an introductory press conference where people were kind of worried that it would be the same message from Rick Bowness to Scott Arniel. Scott Arniel would come up there and say, obviously he respects Rick Bowness, but he liked the game plan every single night. He's not going to change anything, yada, yada. But he actually, kind of took it a step further and said, we were great last year. We were a great defensive team, but we have another step to get to. He brought up analytics and how they're going to start incorporating that into their everyday, on ice, off ice decisions. And a lot of fans were pleased after that introductory press conference on what Scott Arniel had to say. Again, actions speak louder than words, so it'll be interesting to see, because if you look at any analytic out there, Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele shouldn't be playing together. So if they're serious about analytics and taking a look under the hood, is one way to put it, as to what the lineup should look like, which players should be playing with one another. If we come out on training camp and the top line features Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele, it's going to raise a lot of question marks here, because that's what Rick Bowness did last year. He was a coach who typically went more by in-game feel and just what his gut was telling him. And hey, they had 110 points and they were fourth best in the NHL in the regular season. So clearly that worked out, and he's a legendary head coach. But Scott Arniel, the new voice, as they say, but he was with the system. There's a lot of kind of layers there to Scott Arniel and what he's going to bring to the table this year, given the fact he was a head coach last year, but kind of promised a little bit of change. How much change will he incorporate, because they were fourth best? That's a huge question mark going into training camp, which starts in a couple weeks here.
So it's going to be interesting with Hellebuyck, and I know Jake Ottinger really wants to be part of that Four Nations tournament that'll replace the NHL All-Star Game. So it's interesting to see because there's a great battle as far as American goalies. You have Ottinger, you have Hellebuyck, clearly will be the number one. Then you have Swayman coming in there. And so you have 3 to 4 goalies that are among the top 10 American goalies that are going to be fighting. So I'm guessing that Hellebuyck is going to kind of, not that he needs any inspiration, but to me, it's a little different than just going to All-Star Weekend.
For sure. And Jets fans were actually hoping to get a petition going to get Connor Hellebuyck a Canadian passport because, as you know, the Canadians are stacked everywhere. But once we talk about goaltending, it drops off a little bit.
I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury at 40.
Yes, could be him or Stuart Skinner, Aiden Hill. There's Jordan Binnington. Those are the options that Canada's looking at right now. But the Americans are absolutely spoiled with goaltending. As you said, Ottinger, Hellebuyck, Swayman, even Thatcher Demko, who was great last year, had the knee injury, so he might not even start the season healthy. I don't know if they'll want him playing or if he'll even want to play, given the fact he's coming off that injury. But Connor Hellebuyck, locked-in starter for the Americans. Hopefully, you guys can just throw us one of the goaltenders, maybe. But yeah, it's looking rough up here in Canada for the goaltending. Everywhere else, I think we'll be okay. But I'm really excited for that Four Nations Cup. I think best on best, as someone who's currently 21, I haven't had the opportunity since maybe 2014 to watch a best on best tournament. Or I guess there was that World Cup in 2016, but I don't really mentally count that. So this Four Nations Cup and then the Olympics coming back, I'm super, super excited for because my generation has missed out on a lot of those, key core nation hockey memories.
It really is terrific, and it's great to see the NHL is expanding. Overseas stars will play the Florida Panthers this year, and so many Finns involved with the Stars organization. Of course, we talk about Jiri Lehtinen and the legend of him with this Dallas Stars organization, Miro Heiskanen, Roope Hintz. So it's going to be terrific to go over there and play the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. The only downside is we don't get to see the Florida Panthers at home, but that's okay. It's great to be featured on a big stage. All right, before we go, Connor, I wanted to ask you, where do you think the Winnipeg Jets will finish? Second part of that question, overall thoughts on Dallas this year, and then how you see this Central Division playing out as a whole.
So I do think, I don't know, the Central Division is really weird to me. I kind of flip-flop on my thoughts on it often. The Winnipeg Jets, I do think will take a step back this year. They did lose, Sean Monahan, Brendan Dillon, like I said, leaving a big hole on the blue line. Laurent Brossoit, who was an incredible backup goaltender for the Jets. He moved on as well to the Chicago Blackhawks. He kind of priced himself out because he was playing so well. So I do think the 110 points, they are going to take a step back from that. I still do see them as a playoff team. I think they'll be in the mix for that third seed in the Central. Dallas, I still think is absolutely loaded. I was on your podcast after the playoffs and mentioned how I thought they were going to win the cup. They were my cup pick to start the playoffs. And throughout the playoffs, I thought they were just going to roll everyone because I thought they had a loaded roster. And yes, they did lose some key pieces, and I do have questions about some of the lower end on their blue line, but the Winnipeg Jets have those same question marks, right? So I still do think Dallas, with Jake Ottinger in his prime, Jason Robertson, Roope Hintz, Miro Heiskanen, they're still going to be atop the division. I could see Colorado taking a step back as well. Nashville, with all the additions, I could see them taking a step up, fighting for a playoff spot in those top 3 seeds. And Minnesota, I feel like, is kind of flying under the radar as a team that won't really, I don't think they'll push for the 1 seed in the Central, but I think could be in the mix for a wild card spot for that 3 seed. And I think so how I see the Central Division, Dallas is first, and then between 2 and 5 with the Colorado Avalanche, Winnipeg Jets, Minnesota Wild, and Nashville Predators, I think will just be a battle from the start to the end of the season on who can get that 2 and 3 spot and who will be a wild card spot.
I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to give another one that is going to cause some issues. That, in my opinion, I could be completely wrong because this is just a total wild card, throwing it out there. Utah. Crowd will be buzzing. Players get new life. I think defensively they're really, really good. They have some, good vets along with some good youngsters. Love Casey Keller as a player. I just think they got some nice pieces. I'm not saying they'll be in the top 3, but I can see them kind of hanging around that second wild card chase for a bit. I think they're going to have some momentum.
I don't entirely disagree because I'm a big fan of Logan Cooley.
Yes.
He had a great year last year, and I could see him taking a step up. And I've always thought since they drafted him that he's going to eventually end up being a top line center in the NHL. Like, I've been a big fan of his, and I wouldn't be shocked if he makes that jump early with that new life, with that new crowd, new team, and alongside Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz, Dylan Guenther, who's another young ascending player. And then they added Sergachev on the back end,
nice
and
pieces.
John Marino. I could see it. I could be talked into it. I see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fun division. Even Chicago, I think, is going to be kind of interesting. I think they'll be at the bottom, but, at the same time, Central's always been a gauntlet. It's kind of like the Metro. It's just and now you look at the Bruins division with, my goodness, Bruins, Maple Leafs, Tampa, Stanley Cup winner, Florida, and don't sleep on Ottawa now that they have a goalie. At some point, those kids, Shabbat's going to show up, Obviously, you got one of the Tkachuk boys. So I just find, like, hockey this year to me is so fascinating. You are awesome, my friend.
Thank you so much. You as well.
Yeah, you're involved in so many things. Once again, let's give it a plug because last time I got so much feedback. It's like, what's that podcast Connor is on? So want to get this correct because your titles are all over the place. You are a contributing writer for at The Hockey Writer. You content creator and contributor for a great YouTube at Sports Talk Winnipeg. They give you the latest information on the Jets. I am one of those guys that follows and watches, and I also follow Connor's podcast. It's called The Level Flight Winnipeg. So at Level Flight WPG podcast. And it's good for Stars fans because I try to give all the information, and that's why I'm kind of going behind the enemy lines. But at the same time, when you can listen to other podcasts, you really have a better understanding of what the Stars are facing. And you get to hear different perspectives, and that's what I love about today's media. And Connor is terrific to follow regarding the Winnipeg Jets. My friend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much, Gavin. Just real quick, I really appreciate you having me on and all the kind words. It's very, very nice. And I'll come back anytime. You know that.
Well, that's very nice because we will take you up on that.
Yes, let's do it.
And you know what? Maybe it's okay that we have a 49ers fan on the home of the Dallas Cowboys. That's okay.
Okay. Thank you for accepting me the way that I am.
No problem, my friend. He's Connor Hrabchak, and thank you so much for listening to another episode of Spits and Suds. Don't forget, if you see Spits and Suds online on Apple or Spotify, leave a review. I love to read them. I love the feedback. And if you can give us 5 stars, that helps us grow. You guys have made us the top Stars podcast in DFW, and I am so appreciative. And we're pumping out these off-season episodes because of you. So keep listening, retweet, spread the word. It's Spits and Suds right here on 105.3 The Fan. Have a great day, everyone.